First agenda item is the approval of the minutes from the December 17th meeting. Do I hear a motion?
I so move.
And a second. Any discussion? Okay, I see everybody's on mute. Okay, item is in favor of the minutes from the December 17th meeting. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, the second item, before we get into the presentation that Brian and Abby and Megan have put together, just wanted to talk a little bit about getting directly involved in the individual task groups. I've been involved, as has Brian, in 2 or 3 of the task groups on a fairly regular basis, and I think in order to determine where we are with the specific task groups, rather than have a lengthy review of the steering committee meeting, it would be best for the 2 of us to actually actively get involved in the rest of the task groups, in which we are not currently involved at the moment. And we would do that in between the steering committee meetings, so that at least the 2 of us are aware of what's going on, and more importantly, what we or others can do to support the task groups moving forward. You know, we had discussed the fairly straightforward approach that we're taking to task groups, with initially defining what the plan was, and we've done that. There have been modifications. We understood at the very beginning that the plans are to some degree living plans, and they would evolve as we learn more and look more carefully at the scope and the interrelated scope with other plans. And then we would spend time looking at the current situation, and that's basically an information gathering effort. And I believe everybody is at least involved in that. And then looking at what the issues are associated with that. The first implication of that has come through the survey, but there's lots more to do. And we can talk about that a little bit later in terms of reaching out and on a more topical basis, soliciting information and input from the community, but also soliciting and facilitating conversations, which is a very, very important part of not only identifying the issues, but facilitating the resolution of the issues, or at least a path to resolution, and then ultimately coming up with options and taking those options with additional input and prioritizing them on a number of bases, and ultimately making recommendations. And throughout of all of this, and that's part of Brian and my job, and that is to make sure that there is inter-task group coordination, so that we're not missing pieces and areas of scope or related recommendations among various task groups. So what we'll do, Brian and I will have a conversation next week and figure out how we're going to divide this, and then we'll contact the individual task group leaders and get together with you for basically a meeting, if not just with you. I frankly would prefer, as I've been doing, working with the entire task group to determine what we can do to facilitate moving forward and get the appropriate resources that you need. And we're turning up lots and lots of resources, and lots of resources that are coming in from a number of other towns that are engaged in the same process, developing or updating their master plans. And that certainly came up 2 nights ago in our public outreach and communication task group meeting, which was very effective. But I just wanted to give everybody a heads up that you'll be hearing from us. This is very much a coordination and support effort. It's not an auditing effort, despite what my temptation from past experience has been. That's not what it's about at all. In any case, I'll leave it at that. Ryan, you and your team are on.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'm actually going to slightly switch the agenda items, because I think it would make sense for us to before we get into the slide presentation, explain that, well, first let me back up and say, this was a team that was Molly and Megan and Abby and myself. And what we thought that our mandate was sort of twofold. One was to try to prepare a slide deck that summarized some of the key findings from the community survey, along with some impressionistic comments that were part of that. But really to then use that slide summary as the potential basis for public engagement in a forum. And so we had discussions about that, and I think it would make sense to actually tell you what our recommendations are first before we get into the slides. What we're sort of recommending is that we schedule a public outreach forum where the topic is going to be the survey, but also discussions with the community prompted by the survey. And the structure would be, we'd have introductions and then spend about 15-20 minutes going through the slide deck that you're about to see. And then we would divide participants up into breakout rooms, probably 3 breakout rooms, depending on the number of registrants. And their mandate, basically, we would give them an assignment. We'd say, as a group, please generate 5 to 10 items or ideas that you believe the Master Plan Steering Committee should address in the master plan process. So they would have just seen the survey presentation, and then they take that, go into the little breakout rooms, and then they talk amongst themselves to come up with some items that they think should be included in the master planning process. And we would tell them that, the group doesn't have to unanimously agree on the items, but each item should at least be an item of community significance, right? So not just like one individual's specific gripe, but like everybody would agree that if somebody says, I want a lower tax bill, that's an individual thing, but if they say, Bolton should address the tax burden on residents with a fixed income, like that's an idea that is sort of relevance to the whole community. So we would give them some ideas, and then after they had about 20 minutes in their individual groups, we would reconvene and then spend about 30 minutes hearing from each group and having like a community discussion. So it would be about an hour, probably 60 to 75 minutes. And the idea would be that, well, not only would we be kind of publicizing some of the survey, but we could be using this as a way to build consensus around the vision, which we would probably cover in another forum down the line. So that's kind of the thinking that went into this presentation. Does anybody want to add anything? I don't know if Molly or Abby or Megan, I represented that accurately.
I think you represented it brilliantly, as always.
Okay, so then what we will do is I will share my screen, and one other thing. So this is a draft of the slide deck. We definitely welcome your input between now and the time we actually have the community forum. So I know Kia has already sent some really helpful suggestions to Penny, who passed them along to me, and then so we'll take a look at those, and feel free to send us ideas too. We can talk about it after the slides are done. So just give me 1 second. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yep.
Great. All right, so leading us off will be Molly.
Wow. So I have to say I'm pretty familiar with every single question that was put into the survey. To go over a brief history of it, which I'm sure you are all very aware. Bob did extensive research on similar type towns to Bolton, and having looked at some of those questions, we teased out the ones that were most pertinent to our community. We also had various groups come in and got their needs to have this survey. Right now. No, we'll come from get other aspects of other groups in this committee addressed as well. So that was the genesis. A couple other thoughts that I had as I've been thinking about this presentation is when we started these questions, we were not in a pandemic. And when we rolled this survey out to the town, we were in the very nascent stages of this pandemic. I think everyone was very hopeful it wouldn't really last as long as it has. We wrapped this up at the end of June. I am very curious to see now that we are still almost a year in, during the discussions and breakout rooms that we have, if some of these thoughts and sentiments will have changed since this has been completed. So that is something that bears discussion, maybe not tonight, but at some other point. I think it will affect most significantly those who are the working from, questions and probably aspects about Bolton that are making it much more attractive in light of the pandemic. So with that, let's move on to the next slide. I think it's very ironic that the first slide we start with is finished. But we're going to start with people and community. And if those of you who don't know, that was Partner Farm and the 5K that we have every year. So next slide. First things first, demographics, which can be kind of dull, but also very interesting. Question of the 457 people who answered this question, how long have you lived in Bolton? The majority of people have lived here, almost 50% have only been here once in 10 years. And then the next greatest group was 21 plus years, and then in between there, 11 to 20 years. So why do you live in Bolton? And we can get into this in a later slide. Small community was a big factor, as well as good place to raise a family, good schools, convenient location, affordable, and other. People per household. This is a community with, on average, 2 to 4 people. Some households have significantly more, but most often it is in that 2 to 4 range. Age. So we did have some youngsters fill out the survey, which is wonderful to see, but the majority of people who filled this out were between 41 and 50 years of age, followed closely behind with 51 to 60. So it's a perfect bell curve, almost. So a big question that came up was, how important is it for you to remain in your home as you age? And it was very, very important, or extremely important, for about 35% of the population. 190 people really want to stay in their home as they age. I think the sentiment you can garner from this slide is that it is between the extremely and very important, that's almost half of or more of the survey respondents would like to stay here as they age. Next slide.
Yeah, I just noticed, so this one is interesting because we did ask about your home versus in Bolton.
Yeah, that was the survey apology.
And one question I had actually, Molly, is I'm wondering if people who answered this question differently from the home one, it might be that people, when they're saying that they prioritize staying in their home, meaning like a personal residence as opposed to like an assisted living facility, because there was a difference between how they answered this like Bolton question.
Yes. And I think that's a very good question also, because if you see the comments, which I know affects a lot more than just these questions, taxes is a huge driver. So, maybe that goes into your other questions as well. With that, I will pass it on.
I'm going to be talking about environment and preservation. So, next slide. The biggest thing that people cared about preserving was open space and protecting open space, followed by preserving farms. And after that, people started talking about historic preservation and creating historical districts, and followed by landscapes and scenic road designations. And there was a small amount of % who said there was no additions needed. And a lot of the things that people said, we tried to gather a variety of opinions here. People said that they liked it because of the peace and quiet, it helps de-stress, they like having a relationship with nature, and so we can tell that environment is a big part of living in Bolton.
talking about culture and recreation. And to learn more about culture and recreation in the town, question 19 was included in the survey, which was, what local cultural activities would you likely participate in? Through this question, we found that the activities that people have a strong interest in are outdoor activities with 54.15%, and then following that we had community events and local festivals, exercise activities, activities related to the arts, volunteering, sports, educational activities, performing arts activities, historical activities, and then finally lectures and talks with 15.3%. And through some of the open response questions in the survey, we were able to see some strengths as well as some weaknesses regarding culture and recreation in Bolton. For example, one person said that a strength is that the library does an excellent job for free activities for young kids. And some weaknesses people expressed were that they wish that they could retire in a place with abundant arts and music and cultural opportunities. And many people also wish that there was a community center as well as more social gathering opportunities for adults.
Okay, so a little bit about housing, which I know we've discussed already as a group. But I thought this information, this question was really interesting because you can see that there's really a lot of community support for housing that addresses the needs of the senior population. You know, people either gave that a 1 or a 2. Almost 75% of the folks that answered this question rated that very highly. There was also, I want to call everyone's attention to the combination of new business and a mixed-use development. There were actually a fair number of folks who were interested in that as a housing possibility. So that would be sort of like mixed-use housing in a business district. We did ask this question because we were curious to know as well. I know that some folks didn't understand the question and they commented that in their responses. But it's helpful to know that there's actually no really strong or clear preference about where affordable housing ought to be cited. It seems like people are pretty open-minded or have fairly weak preferences as a whole. I'm sure there are people with strong preferences, but as a whole, it's sort of spread across. And then this just gives a sense of the types of, sorry, one second, my computer's freaking out. So yeah, this getting to the question that Molly covered before about people wanting to stay in their home. People are interested in potentially downsizing if that would allow them to stay in a personal residence as opposed to going somewhere else. People are definitely interested in affordability, and they cited maintenance as a concern. So the other thing that's almost like screaming out is the 65% who called out the taxes, right? So that's a big concern for people who are sort of aging in place.
Now we're on to work and business. So the majority of respondents are employed, very few were unemployed, and quite a few were retired. Some of the comments that we went through and combed through were, we don't like how lacking in business this town is. I like the rural character, and we don't have unattractive chain stores. Architecture of the businesses that are here fits with the charm of the town. More independent businesses and shops. So what you can see is that there's a huge spectrum on the respondents that we have received. Since the survey has gone out, and there were a few other comments which may be addressed later, there is a desire to have a downtown, certainly. And since the survey came out, we do have one little shop in that little old Bill Whistle area. And I do know that later this year or next year, the old Cracker Barrel will be having a couple stores in there as well. So there is some rejuvenation there. So some of this information may change since we have some slow progress going on downtown.
And I'm going to be talking about mobility in Bolton. And for mobility, we found that 71.28% of people drive themselves. And then following that, we have people work from home. They find other ways to commute. They either commute to the train station and then bike to work, and finally carpool to work with 1.3%. And then this map here just shows the cities that people from Bolton commute to, represented through the green dots.
I just want to jump in really quickly on this image. So, you know, for visual purposes, I ended up cutting off the map of Massachusetts so we would only see places where people listed. But one thing it illustrates is that to the extent people commute, we are very much an eastern commuting community versus heading west to like Worcester or Fitchburg. And I know Kia had a great idea about seeing whether we could actually somehow code these dots to indicate how many people. So like there were a number of people who are commuting to Cambridge or Boston or Waltham or even like Burlington. But there were, I think, 2 who listed Fitchburg, but you can't really tell that from this graphic. So maybe we can figure out a way to do that to improve the informational value of the map.
And in question 15, the survey asked, if you usually drive alone to work, what prevents you from using other ways, such as carpooling, public transportation, or biking to get to work? And the top reason, with 37.72% of the responses, was that people prefer to drive their own car. And then following that, we have transit service doesn't match their route or schedule. They either work late or irregular hours. They prefer not to because they cannot get home in an emergency. They need to make stops on the way to or from work. They do not because there's no shuttle service to train stations. They find it difficult to find carpool groups. People say there is not enough parking at train stations. They need to use their car on the job. And then finally, with 7.19% of responses, poor bike access.
So I'm going to be talking about education in Bolton. And in question 2, when it was asked about why people live in Bolton, we can remember that people live in Bolton for the good schools, and that was about 51% of respondents. And so we had a very, very wide variety of opinions on the education system here. So a lot of people moved to Bolton for the school system. Some people said it was okay. Some people said that they've deteriorated. Some people said that K through 8 is great, but then also some people said the elementary schools were good, but the high schools not. So there's a big variety of opinions here that we should probably take into consideration.
So we're here with services and infrastructure. Nothing like starting it off with a culvert being redone, which probably emblemizes Bolton at this point. Next slide. So some of the pros, or some of the comments that we have here, are taxes are way too high, which we have heard in pretty much every comment. And to that end, they don't feel that they're getting services for the tax rate. Conversely, there's great town services, and you will see that on the next 2 slides. I won't go through every single one. You can read those. There are other comments such as updates to playground for kids and traffic management, and then road improvements everywhere, including on the nearest roads. A lot of these roads have been discovered various detours, so they're being used as byways to get to major highways. So I combed through this a few months ago. The top strengths that people say Bolton has are the farms, conservation, and trails, which we would expect. It's a small, quiet, rural town. People love that, and schools. A great community. Other people feel very safe here. That was something that was in the open comments that came up over 40 times that they felt safe. Down to volunteerism and affordable, which obviously not many people feel. A lot of the comments that I saw when I was going through these open comments was peaceful, beautiful, charming, etc. You can move on. And then for needs improvement, traffic was incidentally the highest mentioned thing that needs improvement, especially along the 117 corridor. That was mentioned extensively. Taxes, of course, people would love to see improvement in the schools, going back to the earlier points made. Trash pickup is another one, for businesses so that they can get additional tax revenue, restaurants, etc.
Okay, we asked a couple questions around civic participation. So this tells us that there is an opportunity because over 30% of the folks who answered this question don't feel like they are sufficiently aware. So it's great that we have a communications task force thinking about that and then hopefully making recommendations to the town as a whole. This shows us, I circled the ones that sort of have the top aggregate influence, and the email notices from Town Hall are actually probably the #1 source of information related to the town, followed by neighbors, word of mouth. We should have put Mary Boyd as an option here, but unfortunately we did. I love Mary. And then Facebook and the newspapers. And then the other ones I think were a little bit lower, like the school newsletters, the Houghton Building sign. They give information, but it's not something that people rely on so much. Oops. All right, so pretty evenly split between people who would be more likely to participate in the town meeting if it occurred on a Saturday. So we asked the question. It looks like there's probably not super strong consensus to move to Saturday. So that's worth knowing. And then just a little bit, the last two slides cover, wish list. So I already mentioned trash removal was actually mentioned by a bunch of folks. A community center was pretty high up there. And then additional commuter options. But then you see other got almost 27% of the responses because people would make their own suggestions. So, and then at the end, these were just some more impressionistic comments where you can see that people are kind of different minds when it comes to Bolton. There are people who don't want it built up at all. There are people who already think it's the right mix. As Molly said, folks that wish that there were more of a small downtown center. And I think this whole idea of gathering places, that was pretty consistent. People liked, whether it be restaurants or a downtown area or even the mixed-use housing, they liked opportunities for people to get together in person. So that concludes the slide deck. I noticed you had put something in the chat, but we can't hear you because you're muted.
Sorry, but it just, when you first said there were 457 respondents, and a little light bulb went off in my head. And I don't know if you recall, but we had this whole data problem last year with the survey. And it looks like you have most all your charts. I mean, probably if you took comments from the Excel sheet, you're probably okay. But all the graphs are using that flawed. There was something wrong with SurveyMonkey, the way it happened, and there were 154 people who responded in the Excel sheet that are not counted in the graphs. And I think we had a long talk about it, didn't we? I mean, Penny, do you remember this?
Vaguely, but I don't think we ever figured out what it was. We brought it up.
Yeah, but it's important because even though I think a lot of your dialogue may be you're going to show graphs with hard data, you need to incorporate those extra comments and data. It was a flaw in that. If you look at the Excel spreadsheet, respondents number 1 through 154 were not counted, and number 154, 5, and 6 were the same person twice, which is the way I found it. That there was something about I was doing searches for different words and just having fun with it when I had to write that article. So it's a pretty big flaw. So I had offered to go through and count up and stuff, but we kind of just moved on, partly because that I don't know how we want to handle that. And then the second thing is, I take issue with your town meeting summary. Again, we asked the question in a bad way, and you can tell by reading the comments that some people were open to a Saturday meeting, but they didn't necessarily care if it was Saturday or Monday. I would not go on a Saturday, and other people will say, I will never go on a weeknight. So we should have asked it with multiple choices so we could ascertain exactly how many people. But I come to the opposite conclusion as you. If there's 30% more people who would consider going on Saturday, most of those people were younger people, newer people. I think that's worth exploring. Again, I'm hoping we do some follow-up surveys. So maybe if you take what Molly said, that this is a pre-pandemic survey, maybe we should break out and do our mini surveys for various topics.
I would agree with that here because, I think we are all experts in our various things. Council on Aging is not in my wheelhouse, nor is transportation. So I think it would be good to do that.
And I think this is unusually outdated because, as you said, the pandemic is not short, and I think, Bob will tell you, we were talking about communications, we were looking a lot at the Dedham site. Dedham had done more targeted after their initial survey. It's almost like their initial survey was just get warmed up and feel out the topics, and there's tax topics and transportation topics, a lot of these things I think we need to explore more, because I think we might have a better question system.
Well, I think that's what we started, at the beginning of the meeting, saying exactly that we needed to ask perhaps more detailed questions or ask questions in a different way about specific topics or groups of topics in subsequent surveys, very much as Dedham has done, and align that to some degree with our public outreach forums. I hear what you're saying, Brian, but I don't think it precludes us not having money from, to a large degree, doing what other people have done in very much the same way. I don't think we have to do it.
No, I'm just trying to be realistic about everybody's expectations. Like, until we start to spend money on certain things, like, it's just the amount of volunteer manpower that would be required to administer substantive topic area surveys that would be rigorous and would produce data that everybody else. That's like a full-time job.
This is also part of the intent of these breakouts that Brian is suggesting as well.
Yeah, I think you'll get impressions from people and input from people, but in terms of statistical perspective on how people feel in the town, you're probably not going to get going to get people who love it or hate it.
Mm-hmm. But also the people who are going to join any sort of task group, or not task group, but meetings such as this and devote an hour of their time are probably going to be the same players that we see over and over. Not, the obscure friends I know, well, not obscure, the friends of mine, but they're not going to come unless I beg them. But you're not going to get their input.
So, how would you get it?
I mean, I think we need to embody Mary. Trying to get the word out more. And I don't know where Mary's magic is, but Brad alluded to. My concern is that we're going to hear from the same person over and over. What I like about the survey is that obviously we have a big cross section of people that we normally don't get. We'll have to figure out if subsequent surveys are a good idea or not, or how to message that.
Okay, so why don't we go at it scientifically and take a look at the survey that we have and the data we have and ask ourselves what elements of the survey need additional data or need to be asked differently, and that may tell us that one more survey is fine, or maybe we don't need a survey. Maybe it's, we're close enough as it is, and make a decision on that basis rather than sort of on a qualitative basis say we need additional surveys, and that's going to require additional work. We just don't have the resources to pull that off. But I think we ought to let's quantify what we're talking about.
Let me ask a question. How do you in-depth analysis? In other words, some of these questions, did anybody answer two different things? Like, or did you look at, I would like to stay in town. Were there more affordable housing? In other words, not single responses to questions, but did we do any cross-analysis? I don't know if it's available with SurveyMonkey, so I'm just asking that.
There were a lot of good comments. I mean, there were a lot of questions that had open-ended opportunity to comment, and people did comment. So yes, there's a lot of data in the comments that I think are worth. Maybe each subgroup should go just read all the comments and find out which pertain to them and do a little analysis of those.
I did that for the housing. That was a tricky one because some of those were like numbered. And, one of the things that I dove into and went painstakingly 609 responses through and cross-reference was things like, is it difficult to live in Bolton? Excuse me. Is it difficult for you to live in Bolton? That was the first question. And then I queried all the people who said that, and then if they said yes or no, they would pursue an affordable option in Bolton. So you can do that with that data, that Excel data. It's painstaking because you're going response by response and you're pulling that Excel spreadsheet down and trying to get two columns next to each other so you can compare the information. So to Brian's point, it takes a lot of time, but if there's a poignant, thing you wanted to look up, I think you could do it.
Well, again, back to my original point. I think we need to look at the answers to the survey and see if there are areas that do require additional analysis and then pursue that rather than going after this wholesale.
What I was also going to just bring up is, I believe it was Ken Troop who had the original idea that we should have a public forum about the survey results before having a public forum about like a potential vision statement. So I suppose one question is, do we feel like the survey as is gives us enough of a jumping off point to have that discussion about the vision? That seems like it's really the question, right?
My immediate reaction is yes, absolutely.
If you compare sort of the array of responses to the previous survey that what's her name did, up with like profiles of people in Bolton. I mean, she kind of clumps them.
I would touch that totally differently here.
Right, but you can still see the evidence of those people in this survey. You know, there's the totally against all change people. There's the totally out there, we want a lot of development people. And then there's a lot of people in between who are like carving a different area with some moderation, pro or con. But, you know, I think we still have that full range of people. I don't know if the numbers compare to 15 years ago. And, you know, if there's a trend more one way or the other. I didn't get that sense when I read all the comments, you know, and I was trying to count out various things. But, you know, I think we should just jump off from it because I think the fact that we have flawed data, unless we want to go back and recount that and make new graphs, which, you know, again, I think it's sort of a waste of time. We should just move on to the next type of survey. Did it cost a lot of money to do that survey?
Are we talking, which survey are you talking about? The one for the long-range planning?
No, this one.
Oh, Molly did it.
It's 400 to join for a year, and I joined last year, so it require rejoining to do an extensive survey. But if you have a simple survey, you can do one simply on SurveyMonkey. But I'm not sure.
Totally different piece of software. Totally different.
I know
You
that.
cannot compare one with the other. Right.
I know that. I'm just saying that the analysis is lacking here. I mean, we don't have that level of analysis here, partly because the data was flawed in that it made graphs leaving off 20% of the people. It also...
We've had this discussion now for 4 months. What do we need to do, finally, to resolve that issue and stop talking about it?
We have to count the 154 and add it to the numbers we have and make new charts.
Okay, and what does that involve?
It's not very hard. You go each question and you tally up the results, add it to the results we already have.
Great answer. Now the next question is who's going to do it?
But there is an alternative, which is to go the other direction and simply use the number that is not flawed as the number that responded to the survey and leave the data the way it is, but say that it's not based on 475, but it's based on 360.
You have to remember also that people skipped a lot of questions, so the number of respondents for each question are going to be different.
I just want to add that
Part of this. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Abby. Go ahead.
sorry. When I was putting together notes for this, I was using Molly's slideshow that Bob sent to me, and it had larger numbers than that, and there was graphs on it. So I don't know where that came, where that came from, and if the graphs are the same or not. But that's what I was using. The numbers were the 609 respondents. So I don't know if we can just refer to that or not.
That's what mine was too, Abby. Thank you for saying that. I didn't follow the conversation at all. Just like I'm looking at 609 and I crunched numbers and made sure I got 609 every time I did my data.
So I think we need a decision now on whether the SurveyMonkey information that was put out in the graphs and data took into consideration the whole thing.
I'm not sure I understand. Is there something else I can help with?
Yeah, Penny's having audio problems, and she's got an Alexa or something that's talking to her, or a Google Voice.
I will go back through the graphs you have and see which ones look like they only have the 450 something. And maybe you're right. Maybe there aren't that many that we actually show that are not.
The housing data still came out conclusively. The way
Yes.
you guys presented it is what I came up
Yeah.
with
So that's
on my
good.
own.
So maybe I'll go through, I'll count how many graphs are wrong. If there aren't that many graphs, I'll do your new graphs. And, I'm hoping it's just a handful.
Okay, so I'm not sure I understand what the disparity is. If the data that Abby and Stasha are talking about that came out of the SurveyMonkey graphs and data are consistent with the total number that we believe were respondents, then where did the other data come from, and why would we bother to by hand now add all the information that came out of the Excel spreadsheets to the survey data information?
Let me look and see, maybe I grabbed wrong information. So I'll if Sasha or Abby can send me what they had, maybe I did it.
So
Molly, I'll send you the slideshow right now.
Thank you.
and I just grabbed it from Dropbox. It was what you guys had posted in Dropbox as the final survey results. So that's
I
where
might
I
have
found
pulled,
it.
I have like 60, so I may have pulled the wrong one, so the error may lie with me. So root cause analysis, done, and then if I did it, then I'll fix it.
Okay, so the action coming out of this is, Molly, you're gonna take a look at what you have, make sure it's consistent with Stasha and Abby have, and compare that at least on a percentage basis with what Brian and Abby and Megan put together. And let's make a final decision on all of this and make sure that we all agree that the data with which we are working are appropriate and we stand by it. End of discussion. So we can put this to bed, because this is it may impact the answers on the percentages, but even more legitimately, there are people who are going to say, well, just a minute, you're making decisions and projections based on flawed data, and we certainly don't want that. So
I
is
think
that,
we have to be careful about how we refer to the data and not, there obviously are differences, but I think certain words are inappropriate to use. I think we need to look at the data, figure out where the issues are and the differences, but let's not be quite as sort of critical of other people's work as, by saying things or the word used the word.
no, all I'm saying is, I've been in town government too long. All I'm saying is that unless we get it right and we have a good answer, and that answer may have inconsistencies in it, and that's, perfectly normal in data sets, we will have people that will come back and make a big deal out of, quote, flawed data, unquote, which, if we do it right, it isn't flawed. It has disparities that we're able to resolve. So I'm not using the word flawed, but I would assume that other people may. We just don't want that to happen. We just want to do the best job we can and resolve any discrepancies internally and be all in agreement. So let's go with Molly. You take a look at what you have, compare it to what Abby and Stasha have, compare it to what Brian and Abby and Megan have put together, and if there are inconsistencies, it's not a big deal to make some changes in that. I think the presentation is great in overall content, but let's make sure that we all agree with the data sets, so that there isn't any second guessing by other folks that we're misrepresenting the results of the survey. Okay?
Can
Sound
I
good?
just ask one question here? How many respondents did we have?
609 total.
609.
Are there any data being presented on smaller numbers than that? Or is all the data that Brian presented?
Some of the graphs were, I think, 457. And to address,
That's because people skipped those questions.
No,
Yeah, I mean,
no.
that's perfectly
no,
legitimate.
it wasn't because people skipped. 154 whole entries didn't get counted the first time. It was something to do with SurveyMonkey.
Ah.
It wasn't anybody's fault here.
Okay, so do we all agree that the total number is 609?
Yes.
Thank you. And let's make sure that whatever we present is based on 609 with the understanding that a substantial number of people didn't answer all the questions. And consequently, the data sets that are presented for some of the elements of the survey are less than 609. Reasonable?
Yes.
That makes sense. There we go.
Okay?
There's another aspect which we could include in the question on the slides and then cut to Brian, but there is an aspect that says the number of questions that were answered and those that were skipped.
Right.
Which is not represented in the slides currently. It's felt that that would be helpful, as it's clear and explains the discrepancy between the number answered and not answered.
Well,
Maybe we should
or,
look at that.
yeah, no, that's very valid. And maybe just a footnote,
Yeah,
right? Because people may turn that up. I wouldn't be surprised if, a very substantial number of data sets did not include 6 of the 9 answers. So we need a generic footnote that says we included all the answers we received. Okay. Kia, are you happy with that?
Yeah, I have no problem with the skipping answer.
Okay. So when we're finished, nothing is flawed.
Yeah, nothing is flawed. I'm all for nothing is flawed. Just use all the 609s minus the whatever. But
Okay. I just don't want us to be in front of the Supreme Court with this.
yeah, no, and
Okay.
I agree. I mean, I have no problem with it, and I don't mean to accuse anybody. It's just it was a flaw. It just didn't get corrected in
Okay.
the maths.
Okay, so we're all set. I think that's good. But we have been discussing this for quite a long time. Okay, a couple of other things. Now that we're finished the TED Talk and we've talked about the survey, and I think, Brian, would you agree that the next step after you've put together the public forum and we figure out the technology and be able to communicate that the next one ought to be vision?
Yeah, I think so.
Because that was certainly the impression that I got looking at a number of other communication. Community engagement, I think, is the current term used by MAPC in their process. And in a number of cases, actually, they started with vision up front, but it came a close first or second with the survey.
Can I just make one last request related to the survey? And it's for
Promise?
yeah, and it's for Dropbox actually. Is there a way to indicate either through a folder or whatever, like somebody should put the spreadsheet that they believe should be the spreadsheet that we're all using in a folder that's like, because the thing is on Dropbox right now there's like 7 different versions, and then there's the versions on the town's website, and so I think it would be helpful if we just somebody put it, the version of the Excel that we should all be working from this point forward in a spot where it's clear that that's the one we should be using.
And realistically, everything else ought to be in the archive folder. There should only be one appearing. So Molly, in your check, could you go through the folder? Brian's absolutely correct. We put a bunch of them in there.
be happy to go through the folder. I'm not the one who files things in the Dropbox, but I will clean it up.
Okay, well,
It scares me, so I know it wasn't me who filed it.
well, I'll tell you what.
I'll
If
print it.
if you can send me the Excel spreadsheet and the results that you got, which I believe I already have, but I need confirmation of what came out of SurveyMonkey, I'll organize the Dropbox and make it crystal clear that this is the authorized versions, and everything else, realistically, I probably ought to do it. I find it very handy to have an archive. Erica.
I just had a quick question, and maybe this is a question for Brian. How many public forums do we anticipate doing? How many, I mean, I want to obviously keep the residents actively engaged, so I think at some point they're going to be like, another public forum, oh, I don't know if I want to do that. So I'm just wondering if it makes sense to combine that survey envisioning in one public forum, because I think there's gonna be so much to talk about once we get beyond that. That's my only concern.
No, yeah, forum fatigue is not what we want to do. I don't have an answer for that. I think we need to explore that a little bit. First of all, figure out how we would put together a survey and visioning simultaneously. I think that would be a bit of a challenge. But look further downstream at other things we would like to know. And Dedham did 3, if I recall correctly. And I don't think we ought to do more than that because
they combined various topics into this public forum. And I liked Brian's question about, do we just use the survey data as a jumping off point for the visioning? So I think that's something to think about. That made sense to me when he said it.
Ryan, your thoughts on that?
I'm feeling like I want to defer to everybody else.
Having come in late to this process, I really like the idea of a public forum, but I think limiting that to the questions that were on the questionnaire limits the possible conversation. Because nowhere on the questionnaire do we have any indication of whether or not the people living in this town would appreciate greater diversity. If we were to have and maybe that's the visioning part, if were we to have a perfect town, how would it be different from the one that we have now? What would be different about it? And take off the table, the taxes would be lower. All right, blah de blah on that. But I don't want to have, or let me word this positively. I would like us in our visioning statement or visioning conversations to have it be as open as possible.
And have you read the vision statement?
Not recently. I think I did when I first
Karen
saw
has a
this.
copy of it.
Yeah.
I don't think she has a copy of the latest one.
Okay, I'll get that to you. It's
okay.
My knee-jerk reaction is it's in Dropbox, but I'll get that to you. And I think you will find that, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, that it does address that. It does address a much, much broader spectrum than the specific questions that were provided.
I think it addresses Sharon's question.
Okay. And is this something that this committee came up with, or did it grow organically out of some other larger group?
No, this committee came up with it. Ryan put together an original draft, and we kicked it around and came up with a quote final version. But until we've had the public conversation, that's not the final version.
It's a draft.
It's right. It absolutely, and it is the basis to have a discussion. But it's
excellent. I look forward to seeing it then. Thank you.
It's much broader than the elements of the survey. And by the way, a perfect town based on perfect people is unobtainium. So there will be compromises across the board. But I think that's good. I mean, that's diversity, isn't it?
Compromise. I would argue. Sorry, Molly. So compromise is not a dirty word.
No, absolutely. Certain cities.
And I would argue. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Boy, you just saved me from being political. Thank you.
Oh, good. I was going to say a perfect town is actually not perfect to me. That's like an expectation I wouldn't want to live up to. So.
Yeah, perfect towns are boring.
They are. I lived in one.
And you never want to be boring.
Yes. Like the founding fathers, we are pursuing a more perfect town. Okay, I wanted to follow up with basically a discussion of what's going on public outreach and communication. Keo, you're still on, yes, thank you. And
So
we talked about that on some notes.
Bruins 1-1, right?
And a lot of our
2-1.
conversation
2-1. I think we
this
scored.
week came out of the input.
Oh, just before the end.
Yeah, I think so.
And
They just started
a
again.
lot of it came out of looking at other organizations that are doing the same thing with MAPC. And what I find interesting is that as you look at them, you see MAPC fingerprints everywhere. I wouldn't say that it's a template, but in a lot of cases it might be close. But the public communication, or what they call the community engagement plans, are very, very good. And we got a lot of interesting information out of them. And one of them was the encouragement to give much more visibility and brand consistently everything that comes out of the National Planning Steering Committee and all of the subcommittees.
A little. I don't like to watch trailers.
Oh,
right, I was gonna
tell you my theories, but
Good, yeah. Because I feel like the trailers tell me too much about a movie that I'm already interested in, so why do it?
yeah.
Why spoil anything? And the idea of like a really cool line that someone says that is said, and I'm like, when I see it, then I won't be as happy, sad, thrilled, or whatever,
Yeah.
because I've already seen it.
Right.
But
Go to
one
bed?
of the things that
Yep.
Kia
Okay. So you saw what the temperature's gonna be like tomorrow, right?
is coming up with
Yeah.
consistent
No
branding
sweatshirts.
that is on
Sweatshirt shouldn't
everything
see
that
the
goes out.
outside. You should be like sweatshirt inside of a coat with a
And
hat
her
on. They 10
suggestion
degrees
was
out.
that as each
That's
individual
frigid.
task group
And I'll
steering
pull my
committee
sheets
puts
before I
them
leave.
together,
Oh, thank you.
content together.
Thank you.
She
I might be not here when you're.
An agreed upon
I might be
branding
in the
approach,
gym.
and then make sure that that branding is consistently included in all communications going out. My recent experience with this was in the town common, and we were religious about that. Everything had that symbol on it. Everything had the logo on it. And people just simply got used to it. Matter of fact, every time they saw it, they knew we were asking for money.
Ran in the opposite direction.
Ran in the opposite direction, yeah, absolutely. But I'm interested in people's thoughts on this. I think it's a good idea, but I want to make sure that we're all on board. And this does not mean that there's going to be a process funnel that dictates content or approach. It's simply making sure that whatever content goes out in a consistent, recognizable way, that people recognize where it came from. Okay. Okay, I don't have anything else. Other than our next meeting is Thursday, February 25th.
So what decision, if any, was made about the forum and what it was gonna do and when it's gonna be?
Alright, yeah.
Good night. Good luck tomorrow, Jack.
Well, I can tell you when it's not going
You
to
can
be,
do it.
which is February.
Okay, well, I think, Ken, before we answer that question, we've got to get some heads together and figure out, first of all, what the forum is going to be. I mean, we have competing thoughts here of we don't want to have forum fatigue, but we want to have forums or fori, depending on how many years of Latin you took, and decide what it will address and where we need further discussion and information. And I guess the first decision to your point is, are we going to combine the survey and vision together? Are we going to inform the vision by the survey? I guess that's a way of putting it.
Well, one that had occurred to me before, I guess actually before Erica talked about the forum fatigue, was whether or not we wanted to take the two tax FAQ things that we had done and have at least a part of a forum, if not a forum on them, between now and when the town meeting ends. Because it certainly has generated a lot of chatter on Facebook. Whether it would at a forum, I don't know, but it would certainly help for people to understand the way the whole tax thing works. And if that, according to the survey, is what is bothering everybody, then I would hope that the FAQs would help. Maybe it won't, but I would hope that it would.
Well, it's already
I don't know. So I would include that in the discussion of what we're going to have forums about and when they are. And if you're going to do taxes, then it ought to be done before the town meeting.
Okay, and I think you're bringing up a different type of forum. I mean, the forum that we were talking about was one that engendered conversation within breakout groups or maybe in a plenum arrangement.
You don't think that would engender conversation?
Yes, but not in breakout groups.
Well, that's true.
I think the tax forum we're not ready for that. The FAQs Brian did are really good just to bring people up to speed for now. But, we as a group haven't really gotten going on, master plan items
That's certainly true.
I mean, we haven't had any report from the economic people. We haven't talked about, the Community Preservation Act. We haven't talked about, we aren't ready to talk about tax. We don't want to get into the weeds of taxes, which is what the memos that Brian did. That was addressing the weeds, and I think those memos are great, and we'll get them out there, and that will help people just for now. But for master planning, we need to have our land use group, our conservation group, our open space group, our economic group. I mean, taxes, I've always thought, aren't quite worthy of planning compared to all these other groups we have, because taxes are what happen every year at town meeting. Master plan is what we are going to aim for. And it's up to the townspeople to take our report and implement it at their discretion, at the discretion of the energy of which of our suggestions get seized upon by either town departments or volunteer groups or whatever. And that's, that's what's going to drive the taxes.
And yet it's very timely, though, to have a tax, FAQ forum. It's probably on most people's minds, probably what they care about the most.
Right, but we have addressed most all their questions. Actually, maybe when we release this second one, we should say, does anybody else have any other question about taxes? So that Brian can keep adding another page.
But in terms of pure taxes, if you had a tax forum, you would not be talking about the whole philosophy of taxes and Bolton. You would be talking, I think, to Ken's point about understanding your taxes, understanding where your money is going in anticipation of the town meeting. And it would be, to a large degree, a one-way street. It would be a presentation and then people asking questions, and hopefully we have the necessary resources, people, as part of the presentation who could answer those questions. But it would not be about innovative ideas to reduce taxes or reallocate taxes or whatever. It would be an informational thing, which is part of our job. Certainly it is part of our job, and we're doing it. But
I agree, it just seems to have value if we're willing to put in the time to do it. The presentation side.
But in terms of a conversation, starting a conversation with the town, with the community, I believe that a vision conversation and presenting the results of the survey and discussing it are much more within our wheelhouse than talking about taxes in terms of how taxes work.
I agree. I think the taxes seems like a subset that, Brian, don't hate me, but like that the finance committee should host or something very
Yeah.
specific, but that the master plan. I actually attended Dedham's thing the other day, online Zoom thing, and they had for each major category, it's just like a big picture thing. It was keep it simple. Here's 5 goals, and when we went into our breakout rooms and discussed the goals, the question was like, what do you think of the goals? Like, are they in line with what you think? How would you prioritize them? So the survey is more offered up as like not this is hard data that we're going to make choices off of, but this is a starting point for us to have conversation, and then those breakout rooms really got down to some juicy, good conversation about more specific things, but it started with just boom, 4 or 5 goals, bum, 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 bum. What do you think of them? Big picture, high level. So that would be my 2 cents.
Were there 5 goals that were discussed in each of the breakouts?
Yeah. So for each topic. So for example, with the first forum that we're thinking about doing, you've got the survey topics, if you will, and you've got the vision we've already kind of created, and again, just as a draft form, right? As something to start the conversation. And I don't have the vision in front of me right now, but I know that there were some awesome bullets, very clearly defined sections to that. And so that lends itself to some good conversation, I think, at a high level. It helps organize people's brains to talk big. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was really good because they kept saying, we are setting the goals, and then once we agree on the goals and even the priority of the goals, that's going to dictate our strategies. So they kept saying, the breakout rooms were all about, does anybody, disagree with that this should be a goal, or is there a goal not covered, or, how strongly they wanted to actually put the goals, they would have 5. They did group them in 5s. Did they want to reorder the priority of those 5? And there was a lot of interesting discussion on various topics, and probably the different breakout groups might have even not agreed, but they were, somebody was taking notes on all of them.
But each of the breakout groups addressed those 5 goals?
Yeah, so there was like 100 plus attendees, and so they broke out into groups of about maybe 10, 15, depending, and then each 15 chunk group looked at those 5 goals, same 5 goals across all different groups, and then we all came back together in the big, huge forum at the end of it and kind of wrapped it up.
Okay, so in the context of what we've looked at in this group, we have a vision statement, and that vision statement then needs to be translated into goals.
Or maybe tied in with the survey questions, or loosely to tease out issues.
But to some degree, the vision statement really is goals. Ryan?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I'm going to back up for 1 second and just explain that the slides that we put together were actually thematically organized to correspond to the vision statement that we already prepared. Because, we didn't want to be like this explicit about it, but the whole idea was that we would structure the survey discussion in a way that naturally led, because our main values in the vision statement are community, opportunity, mobility, and environment. And so we tried to cover things in that survey presentation that would relate to those core values of community and opportunity and mobility and environment. So maybe it's just a matter of making that more explicit and combining it into one forum. But
Yeah.
At this point, I don't trust my own judgment about any of this, so I'm just going to let somebody else figure out what should be done.
I retract my suggestion, but I think Sasha is probably right that if advisory sponsored something like that, it would be well received. And if you want to broaden advisory to include alumni or whatever, I'd be happy to help out with that.
Yeah, I think we always do a budget forum at the end of April, right before town meeting, but we could expand, that's really just going over the budget for that fiscal year, so we could explain the scope of that to include more like tax 101.
I think that's better if advisory sponsors that type of forum for this year before this town meeting. And maybe at the end of that forum, you can allude to the fact that the master plan is taking up some of these topics. And, give us a lead in, but I don't think, I think that we've produced these memos, which are really good first step, but the next step is for us to set goals. And like if we want to address taxes, some of the goals are that we, grow revenue, that we, some strategies might be CPA, might be business growth, might be, selling lots. I don't know. I mean, whatever we come up with. But for this particular calendar year, advisory would be better taking the specific tax issues just for people who want to know about taxes.
Okay, so stepping back to Ken's original question, which was, what's the scope? And roughly when are we going to do it? And ultimately, how many are we going to have? But with respect to the first one, what is the scope and what is the structure? So what I'm hearing is we have a vision statement that has various high-level elements that could be broken out and explained in a little more detail, one sentence per element, as goals, and then have a presentation on a combination, and conveniently, of what the responses have been, broken out by the elements of the vision statement to the survey, and then have breakout sessions to discuss those, as was done with Dedham, which makes, to my mind, a lot of sense. And I completely overlooked the fact that the survey presentation had been broken out then.
Yeah, and if you want to do that in March or April or whenever it is, that's fine, as long as it's not something that has to get done in February, as Brian suggested.
No, March is, that's perfectly fine.
Okay, that sounds good.
But the first one has to be stunning.
Has to be what?
Stunning.
Now, who's going to organize these forums? This is the low techie of the group, but who's going to organize and run these forums? Do we have someone with that expertise?
Well, we would have to have somebody who is very familiar with using Zoom in breakout rooms, and we would have to lay out a very, very carefully thought out program to do it.
So isn't it we need to look for
collectively
this
we'll be able
person?
to do that. I think we can find enough people to help us do that.
Well, we've been through, certainly Kia's been through, and Stasha has been through one with the Dedham one, and I've been through a number of them, and I believe Ken has as well, with Rebecca's various groups. So we have a pretty good sense of how they work without getting involved in running the keyboard for the technology. But the best way to manage them. And there's a fair amount of guidance on doing that.
I was going to say, it's no small task. the
My
technical
question
stuff
is,
happens.
who is going to
Let's work on it between now and the next meeting and have the agenda item at the next meeting. We can come up with what the details are and who's going to do what to do. And it'll give us a month to work on it.
Yeah.
Think about it, write out goals or whatever it is.
Well,
I'm not questioning what you're going to do. I'm just saying that if you're going to do this in a month and a half or 2 months, you should be thinking now about
Right.
person
And
or
that's what
people you're going to be working with.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The part of getting ready for the next meeting is to address that.
Okay. Just.
okay, so we actually, believe it or not, have a public outreach and communication task group.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, gee. All we need is erudite input from Brian, certainly with respect to the vision statement, and discussion certainly with Megan, Abby, and Molly with regard to putting it together and coming up with an interesting approach for the breakout sessions.
I have a friend who is on a state officer committee, and he does Zooms all the time, and he's usually the host, and so I'm sure he'd be happy to give me pointers and tell me how to do it, and then I could circulate that back to you guys.
That'd be terrific.
Good.
The more help we can get, the
That's
better.
that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Good.
One thing that I would be happy to do is to just contact Jenny Jacobson to find out the details of the town Zoom subscription.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and you have to have a pretty good account to do breakouts.
And we're sort of aiming for 100 people.
You better aim for more than that, because if you get that many, if you get more than that, and you just have a 100-person account, then you're really cooked.
You're in trouble. Yeah.
So you need.
I will say that Dedham has a town of 25,000, and they had between 100 and 150 at theirs.
That's
Just
fine.
relatively speaking.
That's fine, but Zoom has a cutoff at 100 for a particular kind of account.
Got it.
And we would have to do better than that.
Yeah. It closes off and doesn't let people join after 100
Exactly.
Oh,
Yeah.
I see. This is.
The Rebels.
I'm a
the
fanny
Rebels,
on the tech stuff.
the Rebels ran a Christmas Carol sing-along, and the first night they did it with their 100-person account, they had about 150 people, and so they had 50 really unhappy people. But the next
So,
time
Brian,
they did it, they had fixed it. So
Got it.
we just
I'm
need
good at
we
asking
just need to have the right kind of
questions.
account.
That's the devil's in the details, right? That's good. That's good to know.
Asking the stupid question.
Okay, Brian, if you can get real data, we can work on it. Okay, so will the Public Outreach and Communication Task Group will work on this. Abby's part of that, so she'll be able to report on her colleague.
Friend.
Brian will come back with input from Jenny about what account we have and how many people we could have on a Zoom with breakouts. And then we need to figure out how we're going to communicate this, because there's upfront work to do once we figure out what we're doing. We need to get information out to people, and we need to have a mechanism to ensure that we get registration. That's a key element as well, because that will tell us a lot about how we break out our breakouts.
So on the registrations on these, the ones you went to, Sasha and Kia, did people sign up at these, and so they automatically broke them out before the forum started, or?
I think they did it randomly. They just, I mean, I registered, they just sent me a Zoom link.
Okay.
And then when they hit the breakout rooms, they just assigned me to Brandon's room.
So they just sent you to the room.
They just sent me to a breakout. I think they,
Yeah, I don't know what they did behind the scenes to get us into those
Yeah.
rooms.
But the
Most
other-
of them do it that way.
yeah. The other cute thing they did was, because they were covering 3 different topics, they had a quote raffle in between. They had local businesses had given little $25 gift cards. Did you see that, Sasha?
I did.
And they had this raffle. There was like a spinning thing with everyone's name in it. I mean, of course, the names were so small you couldn't read it. And it ended, somebody would win a $25 gift certificate to Pets R Us. And they thanked everyone. They said, "Thank you for staying tuned. And now we're going to go to, the next topic." It was really funny. But I think because there was a time limit, that also made people in the breakout rooms, those were timed. It kept the discussion moving along. It kept people thinking on the bigger topics. And I think it would be really helpful to do something to imitate that as best we can without professional help.
I've
And-
also been in breakout rooms, and sometimes like the hosts can send a question and it will pop up at the top, and so you can get like different questions while you're in your breakout room. So that might be a useful tool as well.
They actually had a little survey.
Yeah, I was going to say the polling was
Little
interesting.
survey, and then they would read the results after. It was like literally 2 minutes. But
or while somebody was presenting, actually was it, I think it was while the people were presenting or in between, if there was lag time, they put a question out there and it would pop up in the middle of your screen. And, where are you from? What neighborhood are you from in Dedham? Or were you not, like he and I? So we were at the bottom, but you would fill that in, and then after so many responses went in, you'd see the results, and so you could see of the 100 other people in the forum what the makeup of the forum was, and actually surprisingly were a lot of other people not from Dedham in there, so it was
and more importantly at the end. So they had their breakout rooms, and then we would get back together. And then the most important survey they did after each one was, what do you think of our goals? Are they very close to what you expect? Are they close? Are they not very close? Are they way off? And so people would just, having just been in a breakout room and thinking about those goals, they were up to speed to answer, which in some ways, that kind of survey is a lot more valuable than the survey they would have done if they just, gave it to you at the beginning.
Right, to back that up, we were talking about, maybe to Erica's point, combining the vision and the survey into one forum. And if you're having these conversations and then you have a pop-up question at the end, maybe it deserves more than a pop-up question, but something that says, which of these is the most important to you? Or, in having just had this hour-long conversation, and now everybody's kind of got the, have been stewing over these different topics and been in different breakout rooms. If you're all coming back together, here's the poll, and some, I don't know what the question is, but some super duper question that kind of, what, as a group, what do we want the most out of that forum? Do we want to know we're spot on with the vision? Do we want to know what they prioritized in the vision? Do we want to know, and again, that's a question to stew over for us before we get there, but it had the capability to do that, to poll the group that was online, which I thought was very
that was really
engaging.
Good. Yes.
Okay, well,
sorry.
Sounds like our level of technical sophistication here is beyond my comprehension. That just reflects on me, that's all. Who ran that forum?
MAPC.
Yeah. See, that's where my question was coming from. We don't have MAPC, so where are we going to?
That's why I chimed in. I was like, it's a lot more involved than we're.
Yeah, that's why I asked, how are we going to do this? Because we don't have MAPC.
Yeah.
I know it's a dumb question, but I'm good on dumb questions.
Well, and to do a forum with a presentation and then breakout rooms and have people come back and then have a breakout room spokesman, report on the breakout room is relatively straightforward. I mean, I've been in those and it's been pretty straightforward. To get into the sophistication of pop-up questions and being able to show the results of a poll at the end of the thing, I think is a level of sophistication that unless we come up with a couple of 100K to get some support from MAPC, we're not going to see. So we'll explore that.
I think we should explore it because I'm on the fence. I actually think we could imitate what they did pretty well.
You know what we could do, even a cheap version, a non-technical version, would be when people sign up, have them give their emails if that's appropriate to ask, and then send the questions at the end. Something that where it's just,
Yeah, right. So there may well be simpler approaches to doing this, but the last thing I think we should do is get to a level of technical sophistication that we trip over, and that's just not going to, that really detracts from the whole operation.
And also, it seems like it may take longer than we expect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's why I'm suggesting we start sooner than later, because it may take longer to get where we're going.
Tomorrow morning.
I'm just checking.
Okay, but I mean, the number of Saturday Night Live takeoffs on the beginnings of conference calls. I mean, when I think about how simple they were and how screwed up they got, and then thinking about going to something like this and trying to do it right the first time is a scary prospect.
I am betting that we have the technology in town and somebody would volunteer were we to ask them.
We'll start beating the bushes, ladies and gentlemen.
I've been at several meetings with state organizations, and it actually is really helpful to get that kind of feedback right away.
Yeah, it is. But again, anything I've been involved in, it's been run by VHB, MAPC, and they're doing this on a daily basis, and they've really, really perfected it. So getting back to the original, Brian, you're going to talk to Jenny, figure out where we stand and whether we can even pull this off. And then we'll get the communications team together and figure out the rest of it, which means, how to put it together, how to publicize it in the beginning. We need the details of how we're going to get people to register, and I think that's critical. You don't get the Zoom notice unless you register. That's another important thing to consider. So I think we have a plan. We'll get the communications team going. Okay, well, that was a little afterthought that lasted a half hour. Is there anything else? I hope everybody's on mute. Well, thank you very much. I would like, yes, and I did say that our next meeting is February 25th, and I would like a motion to adjourn.
I just made it.
Thank you. Seconded. Okay, I dare anybody to. Thank you all for unanimously approving the completion of the meeting. Thanks very much.
Good night, everybody.
Take care, guys.